As disastrous conflicts rage, African leaders meet to find a solution. Will they take real actions this time, or will the violence continue? This and many more will be detailed in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Thabita Ako. Let's begin. African leaders gather in Addis Ababa for the 38th African Union Summit. The focus shifts to two of the continent's most pressing crises, the wars in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. With millions displaced and regional stability at risk, the summit is seen as a test of the AU's ability to deliver real solutions. Beyond security concerns, leaders are also expected to discuss reparations, economic development, and the election of a new AU Commission chairperson. The war between Sudan's military government and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has created what the AU describes as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. With an estimated 12 million people displaced and hundreds of thousands of children facing malnutrition, the conflict has spilled into neighboring countries, including South Sudan, Ethiopia, Chad, and Egypt. AU officials have emphasized the need for an urgent ceasefire. We must stop the war in Sudan because it affects us all, said Bankole Adeoye, AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. However, mediation efforts have struggled due to divisions among Sudanese factions. Political analyst Kabir Omar Musa Yandeki argues that any peace process will depend on the active support of all Sudanese actors, a condition that remains elusive. The AU is also facing pressures to take a stronger stand on external influence in the conflict. Reports of foreign involvement, including arms shipments and financial backing for both sides, have raised concerns that Sudan could become a battleground for competing global interests. On the other hand, the conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has intensified, with M23 rebels capturing Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, in late January. The death toll has surpassed 2,700, though observers suggest the real number is much higher. Over 7 million people have been displaced, making this one of the largest humanitarian crises in Africa. Let's not talk about what's happening in Cameroon's Ambazonia. Despite diplomatic pressure, M23 continues to gain ground, with reports linking the group to foreign backing. While Rwanda denies supporting the rebels, the DRC government insists that Kigali is using the M23 to exploit the region's vast mineral wealth. The biggest crisis right now is in the DRC, said AU analyst Emmanuel Bensa, pointing to recent emergency talks between the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community. These regional bodies are under pressure to act, but African leaders remain divided on military intervention. The AU is expected to push for greater international involvement, with some calling for increased peacekeeping forces and sanctions on external actors fueling the violence. However, skepticism remains over whether the AU has the capacity or political will to enforce a long-term solution. While security concerns dominate the summit, leaders are also set to discuss reparations for historical injustice. The AU has made justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations the theme for 2025, signaling a renewed focus on economic justice. The scope of this conversation goes beyond historical injustice and into the current fabric of societies around the world, the AU stated. Discussions will include not just colonialism and slavery, but also economic exploitation and systemic discrimination. The summit will also discuss the launch of the African Humanitarian Agency in Kampala, Uganda. This agency is expected to play a critical role in responding to conflict, food crisis, and climate-related disasters across the continent. While economic growth is another major priority, experts discussions on Agenda 2063, the AU's vision for sustainable development, as well as strategies to increase Africa's influence on the global stage. Leaders are expected to make key commitment on Africa's development, security, and global positioning, Yandaki noted. One of the biggest political moments at the summit is the election of the next AU Commission chairperson. 3 candidates are competing for the top diplomatic role. We have Raila Odinga of Kenya, former AU High Representative for Infrastructure and former Kenyan Prime Minister. We also have Mahmoud Ali Yusuf of Djibouti, long-time Foreign Minister. We have Richard Randrimandrato of Madagascar. The question remains, will these leaders accurately pioneer the change the African continent seeks? We'll only hope to see their sustainability agenda if the election is successful. However, the summit comes in a critical time, where the conflict in Sudan and the DRC have dragged on despite repeated calls for peace. Meanwhile, economic instability, food insecurity, and climate challenges continue to plague many African nations. Well, it's a matter of concern. While leaders will issue statements of unity and commitment, the real challenge is whether they will back their words with action. The world is watching to see if the AU can shift from diplomacy to decisive intervention, or if Africa's crisis will continue to deepen. Again, bringing you updates on Russia and Ukraine ceasefire. As diplomatic maneuvers accelerate, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is demanding firm security guarantees before engaging in any peace talks with Vladimir Putin. His meeting with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference underscored Kyiv's concerns that any rush deal could leave Ukraine vulnerable to future aggression. Take a look.
We're, of course, happy to welcome the Ukrainian delegation led by President Zelenskyy. We had a number of fruitful conversations, a number of things for us to follow up and work on. And fundamentally, the goal is, as President Trump outlined it, we want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road. So we had a number of good conversations about how we might accomplish that together, and certainly we'll have many more in the days, weeks, and months to come. President Zelenskyy.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Very briefly, I think Vice President said everything absolutely correct. We are very thankful for American support. President Trump, we have good conversation today. Our first meeting, not last, I'm sure, and really what we need to speak more, to work more, and to prepare the plan how to stop Putin and finish the war. We want peace very much, but we need real security guarantees, and we will continue our meetings and our work, and we will be very happy to see General Kalak also in Ukraine and this closest time. Thank you, Vice President, for meeting. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much.
Great.
President Zelensky's insistence on a joint U.S.-Ukrainian peace plan comes amid growing unease in Kyiv and European capitals over what appears to be Washington's increasing willingness to make concessions to Moscow. His government was caught off guard when President Donald Trump revealed he had already spoken with Putin over an hour and announced plans to push forward with peace negotiations. The unexpected nature of these talks raised alarms that Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty could be undermined in favor of a rapid diplomatic resolution. In fear of this, let's see what Ukrainians are saying about this move.
I think it's not really good for Ukraine if Trump will meet Putin and talk something about without Ukraine.
Для українців це негативний знак. Стільки жертв, скільки ця війна вже принесла, і щоб на умовах чиїхось, тоді для чого ці хлопці гинули?
Ну, должно быть на украинском прозоро все быть, а пока оно все в закрытом формате. И вообще этим должен заниматься Зеленский.
However, European leaders, initially blindsided by the US unilateral approach, have since sought reassurance that Ukraine will be fully included in any negotiations. There was an agreement that Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians have to be part of that negotiated deal, said UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy after his own discussions with Vance. While the talks between Zelenskyy and Vance did not produce an immediate announcement on the US-Ukraine minerals deal, insiders suggest discussions remain active. The agreement would allow American companies access to Ukraine's vast reserves of rare earth metals in exchange for continued US military and financial support. Zelenskyy moved to rally European support, warned that Russia could deploy up to 150,000 additional troops within the next year, posing a direct threat not just to Ukraine, but to broader European security. His strategy involves pressuring NATO allies to commit more troops to Ukraine as part of an enforceable ceasefire agreement, countering what many believe is a long-term US pivot away from Europe's defense. Meanwhile, the Munich conference saw strong pushback against recent US statements, particularly from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who ruled out Ukraine's NATO membership and suggested Kyiv would need to cede occupied territory to Russia permanently. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen sought to reassure delegates that while tensions exist within the Western alliance, support for Ukraine remains steadfast. We need to avoid outrage and outcry, she said, urging European leaders to focus on common ground rather than division. The UK has also made clear its stance, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer stating unequivocally that there could be no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine. His government, along with the Baltic and Nordic nations, has reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, vowing to provide strong security guarantees and further military aid. Despite the growing diplomatic pressure, Zelenskyy has shown no indication that he will accept territorial concessions as a condition for peace. His strategy hinges on securing ironclad Western military commitment and preventing any deal that could be interpreted as a victory for Russia. However, the uncertainty surrounding the U.S. foreign policy amid Trump's unconventional diplomatic moves means Ukraine must navigate an increasingly complex political landscape. With European leaders attempting to slow the pace of U.S.-Russia talks, the coming weeks will be critical in determining whether Ukraine can secure a peace deal that ensures its long-term security, or if it will be forced into a compromise that reshapes the balance of power in Europe. In a new development following the disastrous conflict in Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo is facing a deepening crisis as M23 rebels, backed by Rwanda, have taken control of Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province. The rapid advancement southward marks a significant expansion of the group's influence, raising fears of further instability in the region. M23 fighters entered Bukavu's Kanzingo and Bagira zones late on Friday, encountering little resistance. Residents described a city in fear, with businesses shut down and civilians fleeing. The FARDC had left. There were no clashes, said a resident named Helene, who witnessed the rebels march past her home. The fall of Bukavu follows a similar pattern to last month's seizure of Goma, the capital of North Kivu, on Thursday. M23 captured Kambamba and the commercial home of Kantana before swiftly advancing south along the N2 highway. The takeover of Kavumu Airport earlier in the day marked a critical moment, effectively cutting off an important military and supply route for the Congolese government. As the crisis unfolds, President Felix Tshisekedi has traveled to Germany for the Munich Security Conference, appealing for international intervention. This conflict could lead to a spillover in the region, he warned, reiterating calls for global pressure on Rwanda. The Congolese government has long accused Kigali of using M23 as a proxy force to exploit the DRC's rich mineral resources, allegations supported by multiple UN reports. Despite the urgency of the crisis, Tshisekedi will not attend the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, where regional leaders are discussing solutions. Prime Minister Judith Suminwa Tuluka is representing the DRC instead. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate. Fighting has destroyed 70,000 emergency shelters around Goma and Minova, leaving 350,000 displaced people without adequate shelter, according to the United Nations. The M23 rebel, which resurfaced in 2022, is the latest in the series of conflicts that have plagued eastern DRC for decades. Rwanda justifies its involvement, but experts argue that Kigali is exploiting the chaos to control the region's valuable mineral trade. Western nations have taken note. Canada recently withdrew its military personnel from the UN peacekeeping mission, citing deteriorating security conditions in Goma. The international community is also grappling with how to respond to the growing evidence of Rwanda involvement. With Bukavu under rebel control, the Congolese government faces a critical challenge. Do they respond militarily or seek a diplomatic resolution? As Tshisekedi engages with global leaders, the pressure is mounting on regional powers, particularly in Rwanda, to be held accountable. The coming days will be decisive. If M23 consolidates its hold on Bukavu, it could shift the balance of power in eastern DRC, making a return to government control even more difficult. Meanwhile, the displaced millions trapped in the cycle of violence remain the greatest victims of a war that shows no sign of ending. Well, that's pathetic. Over to Ngarbuh's massacre in Ambazonia. February 14th marks 5 years since the Ngarbuh massacre, one of the most brutal atrocities in the ongoing war in Ambazonia. The slaughter of innocent civilians, including 13 children and a pregnant woman, by government forces in Ambazonia and allied militias sparked international rage. But years later, little has changed. The violence persists, the perpetrators remain largely unpunished, and global attention has shifted elsewhere. This anniversary raises urgent questions and concerns. Has the world turned its back on Cameroon's conflict? What role will international bodies play under new political realities? And is Africa's deepening crisis slipping off the global agenda? Well, there's so many questions running through the minds of a lot of persons. On February 14, 2020, what should have been a day of love turned into a scene of horror. Armed forces from La République du Cameroon and allied Mbororo Fulani militias stormed the village of Ngarbuh, accusing residents of harboring separatist fighters. Homes were looted and set ablaze, and unarmed civilians, mostly women and children, were shot and burned alive. At first, the government denied the responsibility, blaming a fuel tank explosion and even suggesting separatists were behind the killings. However, as international pressure mounted, human rights organizations and independent investigations revealed the undeniable role of Cameroon's military. Eventually, authorities were forced to acknowledge their involvement, but justice remains elusive. 5 years later, little has changed. The survivors continue to suffer, the conflict rages on, and the cycle of impunity persists. Ngarbuh was not an isolated incident. Before that, there was Kwakwa in January 2018, where an entire village was set on fire by government troops. Later that year, we have Kombo, the largest town in the Savannah zone, faced a similar fate, with homes, businesses, hospitals attacked by soldiers. Reports indicate that even wounded separatist fighters were dragged from hospital beds and executed. The war has reached catastrophic levels, yet international response has remained weak. Humanitarian conditions are worsening, and with over 1 million displaced people, Cameroon is now one of Africa's most underreported crises. As the global stage shifts, conflicts like Cameroon's risks fading further into obscurity. Under the previous U.S. administration, the crisis in Cameroon drew some diplomatic pressure. But with new leadership in Washington, the new administration, and shifting geopolitical priorities, Africa's conflicts appear to be receiving less direct intervention. With the return of President Donald Trump to the White House, This could signal a major shift in foreign policy. So far, his administration has focused more on economic and strategic interests, leaving African conflicts like Cameroon, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo with minimal attention. The question remains, will Trump's return mean a recalibration for U.S. foreign policy toward African conflict, or will these wars continue unchecked? Well, the questions bobbing through my mind. Amidst this backdrop of war, the African Union Summit in Ethiopia has drawn attention to Africa's unresolved conflict. Leaders are deliberating on conflict resolution strategies and pushing for reparations and justice across the continent. The AU's focus on reparatory justice is significant, largely significant, but it remains unclear whether concrete action will follow. The conflicts in Cameroon, Sudan, and Democratic Republic of Congo demand more than symbolic resolutions. They require urgent intervention, ceasefire negotiations, and international mediation. 5 years after Ngarbuh, the future of Cameroon's war remains uncertain. For 8 years, this conflict has lingered in Ambazonia. The conflict, the violence continues, regional instability is rising, and the risks of further massacre looms large. Will the AU, the US, or other global powers step in to prevent another humanitarian disaster? Or will the people of Ambazonia and countless other villages remain forgotten casualties of Africa's silent wars? Well, coming to the climax of this report, it's indeed a pathetic situation. There is a dire need for urgent intervention as we look forward to practical and decisive policies to support Africa and awaken her from the shackles of the repercussions of war to humanity. Until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, we'll be bringing you untold stories on Undaunted ABC Amba TV at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day.